नहीं मैंने आगे को फोन किया शिवम को भेजा था मैंने शिवम को भेजा था रिकॉर्डिंग की ना बोल दिया ना पूरी गुड मॉर्निंग जैसे बोले जैसे
Recording in progress.
छह नंबर पे 6 नंबर बंद करके दोबारा करना
Let me know what reforms you would like. Like,
I was discussing with you for everything.
Yes.
I think there is a freedom for every
Yes.
for my own time, everything. Everything has to like
there is a way to do it.
dynamic process. Brainstorming has, it is not in a critical sense.
I actually read it and I said this was also
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, friends, thank you very much. It's my honour to welcome to today's information session on COVID-19. We have an abridged session today. The meeting will run for 1 hour until 1:30 Geneva time. Recalling, of course, we have a further session at 2 o'clock this afternoon, for which member states and ministers you are accordingly invited. In the interest of time, I'll give the floor directly to the Director General, Dr. Tedros, for his welcoming remarks. Over to you, DG.
Thank you, Tim. Honourable Ministers, Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends, good morning, good afternoon and good evening to all Member States, and thank you for joining us once again in our weekly session. Yesterday, I met with the heads of the World Bank Group, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Trade Organization for the first meeting of the Task Force on COVID-19 vaccines, therapeutics and diagnostics for developing countries. The purpose of this task force is to accelerate access and delivery of vaccines and other COVID-19 health tools to developing countries and to mobilize relevant stakeholders and national leaders to remove critical roadblocks. We're calling on G20 countries to embrace the target of at least 40% vaccine coverage in every country by end of 2021 and at least 60% by the first half of 2022. We need countries to share more vaccine doses now, including by ensuring at least 1 billion doses are shared with developing countries in 2021, starting immediately. We're also calling on Member States to provide financing, including grants and concessional financing, to close the residual gaps, including for the Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator. And finally, to remove all barriers to the export of inputs and finished vaccines and other barriers to supply chain operations. Next, let me take a few minutes to discuss the Delta variant, which is causing great concern globally and within WHO. Delta is the most transmissible of the variants identified so far. It has been identified in at least 96 countries and is spreading rapidly among unvaccinated populations. As some countries ease public health and social measures, we're starting to see increases in transmission around the world. More cases means more hospitalizations, further stretching health workers and health systems, which increases the risk of death. As we have said, new variants are expected and will continue to be reported. That's what viruses do. They evolve. But we can prevent the emergence of variants by preventing transmission. It's quite simple. More transmission, more variants. Less transmission, less variants. That makes it even more urgent that we use all the tools at our disposal to prevent transmission. The tailored and consistent use of public health and social measures in combination with equitable vaccination. This is why WHO has been saying for at least a year that vaccines must be distributed equitably to protect health workers and the most vulnerable. Now, for today's presentations, we will first hear an update on the Global Outbreak Alert and Response Network from Pat Drury, who runs the WHO Operational Support Team. He will be joined online by Professor Dale Fisher, who is the chair of the steering committee, and Dr. Gail Carson, who is the deputy chair and representative of the International Severe Acute Respiratory and Emerging Infection Consortium. As you know, GORN is a key part of the global health emergency workforce. I very much appreciate the support that Member States provide to encourage their technical institutions and partners to participate in GORN. I would like to encourage even greater support for this life-saving network and especially for strengthening its international deployment capacity. Next, we will be hearing from Assistant Director General Mariangela Simao on a draft proposal for adjustments in the COVAX allocation mechanism for vaccines for the fourth quarter. This is in response to issues raised by member states this year. We will then finish with an update from Chief Scientist Soumya Swaminathan, who will present an outline of the mRNA Technology Transfer Hub and discuss next steps. And following today's information session, we'll be having a briefing on progress within the organization on addressing the issue of sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. As always, we're grateful for your engagement and we look forward to your questions and comments. I thank you. Tim, back to you.
Thank you very much, DG. And first I'd like to invite Dr. Mike Ryan for a few words, and then we'll pass the floor to Mr. Patrick Jury, as DG indicated. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Tim. As you can see, I'm wearing a mask today that has both WHO and GORN represented on it. Take it off to speak. I wear both my blue and my orange lanyards with great pride. And I'd like to thank our GORN partners for over 20 years of service to the world and to the people of the world, with over 250 institutions and other networks who focus together on recognizing that no one institution can do it alone. No one institution has all the capabilities, all of the capacities to prepare for, alert the world and respond to health emergencies, in this case particularly to epidemics and pandemics. The work that GORN does is very much aligned with the Director General's vision for a global deployable health emergency corps. The world being able to not just move commodities like vaccines, not just move materials, but to be able to move the best people into the right places to save lives at the right time. GORN embodies this principle. Increasingly, we see those capacities developing within national systems, and WHO is fully committed to supporting the development of national capacities so that there can be redeployment of staff within countries, between countries, with institutions and networks like GORN, being the beating heart of a system that allows countries to cooperate together more deeply. This is at the centre and the core of the Director General's vision for a world that is on alert and a world that is ready to respond to emerging health crises anywhere in the world at any time. We thank our partners in GORN, our partners in the EMT movement, our partners in the Global Health Cluster, humanitarian network of partners, and thank them for the work they do together to bring to fruition the dream that Dr. Tedros has of connecting all of these capacities globally and being able to deploy them in a timely fashion anywhere in the world in the service of our member states. With that, and with personal thanks to Patrick Jury for his years of service in guiding and supporting the GORN network, and my best regards to both Gail and Dale for their service in leading the network. Patrick.
Thanks very much. I wonder if we can put up the slides, please. Thanks very much, Stacey. Thanks, Mike, for the introduction and for the opportunity to provide a very quick update on the. Just by way of a very short introduction to on that slide, you'll see a screen capture from the emergencies dashboard of WHO, showing that there is a broad distribution of institutions globally, but it's by no means universal, and one of the asks today would be for member states to encourage their institutions to join the network. WHO has provided the operational support team and the secretariat for this since 2000. the development most recently in that is that we have UNICEF embedded in the operational support team here. And for the first time, we're looking at how we can deploy the resources of network partners to support other network partners and WHO particularly. Its work is in coordinating and supporting partners to get to the field for rapid investigation and response. Next slide, please. Some key facts over the past 20 years. I'm not going to go through all of them. We've had a lot of meetings, you won't be surprised. But 170 missions in over 100 countries supported, 3,328 experts deployed in the field, equating to almost 110,000 man-hours in the field. This is a considerable financial value for expertise in the field, and it is something which partners have provided as a pro bono, effectively a pro bono and in-kind contribution. Next, please. This slide will give you a very quick overview of the deployments for pandemic operations since 2000. I think it was the 2nd of January 2020 that we had our first meeting with the steering committee and operational partners. And in January, we initially deployed staff to support the outbreak response in Wipro. Gradually, that has expanded to all regions and a considerable support to WHO's global role here at headquarters. I won't go into the details of this. Suffice it to say, if you look, it's mainly laboratory, epidemiology and surveillance, data management, case management, and IPC. That would be the traditional strengths of the network and the key focus of the expertise that we deploy. That perhaps is changing. Thank you. Next slide. Also, in terms of the pandemic, it's pulled many of the global institutions and ways of working well out of shape. And for Gorn, that started in January with embedding key partners from our major, those that we work with operationally in the global IMST at headquarters. We've had 71 weekly meetings with our partners. That had already been established after the West Africa meeting. What's new is that this is about the strategic planning, the operational coordination, the risk assessment and response, the traditional epidemiology that you would expect, but also integrating new developments in the areas of risk communications and community engagement on a weekly basis, and turning new sources of information into key data for decision points. I want to thank partners for the role that they played in a global consultation on contact tracing in June last year, and since then, fortnightly meetings where we have exchanged experience among countries and partners, and where we've been able to help implement some of the Solidarity Fund activities for contact tracing capacity. Throughout this, we've used a knowledge platform and a series of webinars and non-traditional means of communication to get the message out about many key interventions. On the right-hand side there, you see a cartoon about getting vaccinated. For those of you who don't know Dale Fisher, that's Dale's cartoon ego in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. I say that because one of the main differences has been that for the network, the engagement of Dale and Gail as real officers of the steering committee, committing almost 100% of their time has been a huge benefit. Thanks. Next, please. I'm not going to go through the areas of work. Suffice it to say that since January 2020, all of the work of the network has been focused on responding to the pandemic. The network partners are engaged at a national level in your countries as key parts of your national response, and we rely on their surge capacity to be able to mobilize international support. You can look at the details in that slide. In the interest of time, I'm going to push on. Thank you. Next three slides cover three innovations. One is in the area of risk communication, community engagement, collective service. Over a year ago, this was established as not established, but strengthened as a new initiative between the Federation of the Red Cross, UNICEF and WHO, with support from Gorn partners to look at a more collective way of engaging communities and putting them at the center of outbreak response. Next slide, please. There's growing recognition and commitment that its community leadership is vital to outbreak response. This collaborative partnership puts that at the center of many of our strategies, and they're working to deliver common strategies, tools, guidance, and a coordination platform. Thank you. Related, next slide. In a related way, the GORN was set up in 2000 to coordinate and integrate partners and key technical aspects of outbreak response. Integrating outbreak analytics, bringing together data from programs, from social science, from community, as well as from epidemiology, needs to be a holistic approach to ensure that we can bring all of the partners together from all of the disciplines to make rapid decisions on outbreak priorities on a day-by-day basis. As we see in the pandemic, it's really a mosaic of thousands of local outbreaks, and this integrated outbreaks analytics is critical at the community and the response, the field response level. This is supported by a core team, you can see the partners there, and a working group on analytics drawn from GORN partners. Their plans are to develop this into a network of trained experts and teams who can deploy to either set up operational cells or help countries apply this IOA methodology. We really encourage countries both receiving support and being able to offer support to engage fully in this as we move forward. One of the other, next slide please, one of the other innovations that the network has helped catalyze with WHO is in the area of a tool called GoData. On the slide here, again taken from the emergency dashboard, you'll see that there are over 60 countries where there are 80 projects rolling out this tool, which provides support to field responders for case investigation, contact follow-up, and visualization of transmission. It's been coordinated by WHO, but it's really taken us 20 years to get this off the drawing board and into the field. As we move forward, we'd be really looking to work with member states and partners to see how that type of innovation can be accelerated significantly. Next slide, please. And please go on. The next one is just an outline of strategy for the GoData for the next 2 years. There are a couple of other hidden slides which participants can look at their leisure. The steering committee is the main advisory and directing body of the network, which is very fluid and flexible. It brings together a technically diverse network of expertise. The members of it are at mid to senior management and operational levels, providing, not providing, but part of institutional and national response to serious outbreaks. So they bring a lot of practical experience as well as their technical expertise. It's a group of 21, WHO being the one permanent member of the steering committee. Highlighted in red are the two officers of the steering committee, Dale and Gail. Thank you very much. Next. In June, just a week ago, we had our 29th meeting of the steering committee. It meets formally every 6 months, and during the pandemic last year, we met every month, and now we're meeting every 3 months. Last week, the primary objective for the steering committee was to look at the COVID pandemic reviews and panels, their recommendations, how that fed into the World Health Assembly 2021, the resolution which was endorsed at that, and to agree on next steps over the next 6 to 12 months. Next, please. The steering committee highlights, as always, I don't have to tell you what a powerful speaker Mike is, and the partners really appreciate the clarity and the focus that he brings to the discussions. It's a key part in keeping the network very focused on operations. We had a panel discussion which brought together leading lights from the IHR Review Committee, the Global Preparedness and Monitoring Board, the Independent Panel, and the IOAC, to look at what they had done in terms of their investigations and reviews, how that fed into the World Health Assembly, and what would come next. The steering committee also looked at an overview and analysis of these recommendations and some initial surveys that we've done among partners ourselves. Next. The main outcomes of this was the recognition that it's important to mobilise the 20 years of experience at the coalface of this network and to give that a voice in terms of advocating for technical networking, for global solidarity, and for science and data as a driver of decisions in outbreak response. We've decided that in terms of developing new strategies and how the network functions going forward, it's essential to put the community at the centre of decision making about systems that are being designed to help them. The steering committee and the network more generally will take on a series of communications about the current priorities of COVID-19 and their advice and thoughts about the future direction of global systems and capacities. Thanks, this opportunity to talk to you briefly today is an important start for that. We made some decisions, one particularly in terms of strengthening global surveillance and alert with regard to the new hub being established in Berlin, that we would work with the Robert Koch Institute in Berlin, which is a WHO collaborating centre for GORN, to ensure that we're able to support and mobilise the network for this initiative. We've also agreed on a series of concrete, apologize for the misspelling, on GORN's contribution in preparedness, more precisely, and in partnership with the Global Strategic Preparedness Network. Thank you. All of this is focused on bringing the whole network together at the end of the year in a global meeting of partners. The last one was 5 years ago, and I'm sure that I remember that many of the issues that the Director General and Mike brought up at that meeting have even more resonance now today. That meeting will endorse a new strategy and confirm partners' commitments to the network and how to save lives. The process of getting there will involve the fullest engagement of network partners and stakeholders in developing that strategy and in the advocacy. As we come up with the new strategy, we'll see how that reflects and needs to change the governance of the network so that it remains fit for purpose. The GORN governance has been very light and agile, and that's what's allowed the network to be adaptable, elastic, and responsive. I think I mentioned the point before, but this needs to be re-emphasized. Communications and advocacy for our partnership, for GORN obviously because it's our own constituency, but also for the other key partnership networks that Mike mentioned, the emergency medical teams, global health cluster, and a myriad of other technical networks that provide support in all outbreak response. The final message from this would be that I think we have to recognize that there's significant resource implications in developing global systems which are more responsive and more flexible. And we will be exploring the resource implications and the need for investment in the capacities of the partners in the network. These are institutions in your countries, by and large. Some of them are public, some of them are non-governmental. And it's through that investment that we hope to be able to strengthen global surveillance, preparedness, and contribute in very meaningful ways to the Director General's initiative on the Global Response Workforce. With that, I'd say thanks. If there is more information or questions that you have, because I think we're going to fall to time today, you can contact Dale, Gail, or myself. But please, I don't want to cut across established connections and communications channels with Tim and the GBS team. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pat, and Professor Fisher and Dr. Carson for this presentation. In the interest of time, I'm proposing we'll go to the next set of presentations and then come back for one round of questions from member states. So with that, I'll now move to the second item, the update on the ACT Accelerator and COVAX, and ask that Dr. Mary Angela Samauer please take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, the topic that we're going to present now is on the allocation, the proposals for the next, what we call the interim phase of the allocation that are based on several feedbacks we received from member states. May I have the first slide, please? This is what we're going to cover. You see here. The second bullet on COVAX supply forecast we're not going to cover today because it's up on Gavi's website yesterday. But we will focus the discussion on the transition to an updated allocation methodology because that's where we need to get your inputs not only today. This is the beginning of a process. Next. You've seen this slide. This graph is actually updated maybe twice a week. We have almost 3 billion doses used globally, and you see the areas that are light green or white, they continue to be recurrently in the same position. We have, of course, you know that we have, as COVAX, we have shipped around 90 million doses to 133 countries, but supply constraints remain very, very harsh. And we expect for the next months that with the donations coming in and also the stabilization of supply, we will have a better outlook on this map. So next slide, please. 6 months after we start running the allocation mechanism, you will remember that last year we went through a series of interactions with you when we are designing the allocation mechanism. So today, let me say that we do have established a joint allocation task force, joint because it's WHO and Gavi, and we have the two coordinators of this task force here with us. One is Claudia Nane from WHO, the other is Andrew Freeman from Gavi. And Claudia will take over now the presentation to introduce to you the current thinking and proposal that we're developing together with the partners to make sure that we have a fairer allocation mechanism for the next few months. Claudia, over to you.
Thanks, Mariangela, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, colleagues. Mariangela showed you the slides on the administration of vaccines around the world. And here what you see is a graph that shows on the x-axis the COVAX allocation versus on the y-axis the population fully vaccinated. And why are we showing you this? Because we want to focus your attention on the fact that unfortunately, the fact that COVAX was able to ship and provide countries only with 3% of all the vaccines circulating in the world shows that there are around 60 countries, 60 participants in COVAX that have not achieved 3% coverage of their population. You remember this was one initial target we gave ourselves to ensure the healthcare system is protected. So we wanted to vaccinate frontline health and social care workers to ensure the functioning of the health system. And you see also that you may remember the first phase 1 was up to 20% population coverage with a proportional allocation of vaccines to COVAX participants. And you can see here that there are several participants that are still way behind in this target. And clearly the supply constraints and delays that COVAX is experiencing are creating this situation. So to move rapidly, what we are proposing is that we look at the way we allocate vaccines through COVAX with a different perspective, and we try to be more impactful with the few doses we have available. And so what we are showing you here is that we could have an approach whereby the available supply is the driver for the allocation mechanism. And so now that we have a low supply availability, we would suggest to have a needs-driven allocation pace. So a pace that is driven by countries' needs in terms of population coverage. when the supply increases for COVAX, then we could look at countries' capacity to use effectively the doses and modulate the quantities allocated to these countries according to their absorptive capacity. Obviously, without any disadvantage for those countries experiencing difficulties in implementing vaccination process. So the idea is to have, as Mariangela was suggesting, this interim phase where we could consider other variables, not only a proportional to population allocation, but an allocation that takes into consideration the doses administered in each country and their epidemiological situation, their epidemiological context. Here is where you see the changes and the new features that we would like to introduce in the allocation criteria. The objectives of this interim phase remain unchanged. You know, we ensure that doses are allocated as soon as they are made available. We are serving all possible participants, those able and willing to receive doses, with products that have at least an emergency use listing. We are trying to minimize the gaps in the delivery sequencing, and we are taking into account product preferences expressed by participants and their own choices whether to get the same vaccines or a vaccine that better matches their preferences. So this will remain exactly the same. However, the big change is the fact that we don't use anymore the proportional to population criteria, but we would determine the quantities, so the doses allocated to each participant, looking at the total doses administered in countries with all sources of vaccines. Because we have seen that, unfortunately, COVAX has only the 3% of the, if you want, the market share here. We would include new criteria that are listed here, mainly epidemiological criteria, determining the volumes that countries will receive in each allocation round, and determining whether volumes needs to be increased because of the emergency situation that the participants are facing. Obviously, we take into consideration absorptive capacity, but we thought that would be more useful in the sequencing of the shipments. And we also try to use doses that are coming available to COVAX thanks to donations to address immediate needs and the ever-changing context we are seeing out there in an agile and flexible manner. So we know, last time we met, we presented you the allocation algorithm that tries to be objective and applies the equity and fairness principles. We would need to change this algorithm, and these changes will require time. So we think the process could be that already for the next allocation round that takes into account supply in Q3, we could apply an interim approach that takes these criteria into consideration, so the total doses administered in countries and the epidemiological criteria to sequence the shipment of volumes while we make the changes to the algorithm, and we should be able to apply these changes in this interim phase already starting from Q4. Just a quick overview of this epidemiological criteria. You already talked about the total vaccines administered by each country. This makes sense given what we have seen out there, 3 billion doses, almost 3 billion doses used, and only 90 million doses coming from COVAX. On the epidemiological side, we think an index, a severity index, could be composed of 4 main indicators, all looking at the magnitude and the trend of the pandemic in countries. And here we propose to use the 28-day trend in cases, the 28-day in mortality, and cumulative cases and cumulative mortalities, all obviously normalized for the country's population. It's It's a big change. It's a different concept we try to apply to the allocation, but this will really help us to be more impactful, targeting those countries where there is a very, very low availability of vaccines, and there is an epidemiological situation that is worse than the rest of the world. I'll give back the floor to Mariangela to present the next steps.
Very quickly, because we are sharing this presentation today with you, and we welcome feedback. This you have received the JAT email. If you can send us feedback by the 15th of July, we would follow the same methodology we used before. We get the feedback, we come back to you with the comments and what can be incorporated and so on. There is a working document available online, and this document will be updated as informed by your comments. But we are also ready to come back to a member state briefing and discuss more in depth any of the comments received. And we expect that the new methodology will be finalized for the interim phase by the end of August 2021. We are still waiting to see what we'll do in phase 2. Because there are some moving pieces with the global vaccine strategy and so on. So that will come back to you as well. Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Mariangela, and thank you, Claudia, for that presentation. Now, my pleasure to introduce Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, Chief Scientist, for an update on the mRNA tech transfer. Thank you, Soumya.
Thank you very much, Tim, and thank you, DG, for the introduction. If I could have the slides. First, I wanted to give a very brief update on something that we've talked about earlier, and that's the setting up of the vaccine technology transfer hubs, starting with the mRNA technology. As you probably remember, there was an announcement about 2 weeks ago on the first mRNA hub to be set up in South Africa. The selection was based on the applications that were received from countries to the EOI, the expressions of interest that WHO has put out. And we have convened an expert group through the PDVAC mechanism that we have that advises on vaccine R&D to really look at a predetermined set of criteria, look at the applications and score the countries based, or to score the applications based on those criteria. And we have focused only on Africa for the time being because of the acute need, the equity considerations, and the fact that the African Union had already done a lot of groundwork in determining and selecting the countries that would be most suitable for the first hubs. So the next steps as far as the South African proposal would be to really enter into a detailed discussion with the consortium that South Africa has proposed. It's a combination of public, private sector, academia and government. We will need to set up a dedicated team, a technical team that will work with our partners there to discuss a variety of issues from governance to regulatory to funding, etc. And then a site visit to be prepared in the next couple of months with all the partners. So that's actually working on the hub itself and how it's going to function, but also at the same time, we are looking at the technologies, and I'll say a little bit more about the approach, the two-pronged strategy that we're taking on selecting the mRNA technology. Again, the same expressions of interest that we had put out attracted a large number of responses that we are now going through. And then over the next 2 quarters, we will be also identifying other potential hubs, not just in Africa, but in other regions. And I know that there is a lot of interest from many member states. But what we propose is that this be more of a regional approach, since it's really addressing the question of regional health security, that it doesn't really make sense for every country to set up an mRNA or any other vaccine production site rather taking a regional approach to determining which technologies in which countries, as well as how we could have more of self-sufficiency within the region, even in terms of raw materials and other ingredients that are required for vaccines. I mentioned that we need a lot of work to be done on selecting the technology itself and the technology partner, and we're taking a two-pronged approach. The first one is, of course, working with companies that have late-stage technology, and as we know, there are currently two manufacturers, the BioNTech, Pfizer, and Moderna, that have successful mRNA vaccines that have been proven to be highly safe and efficacious and that are currently being used around the world. If either of these companies agrees to the tech transfer concept, then of course one can go much faster because it's already at a stage where the training can be provided and the facilities can be set up, and within 9 to 12 months you could have the first batches coming out. Initially it could be fill and finish, but it could also be the actual manufacturing itself. So this is a much more efficient way of doing it. It will be faster. However, we have to recognize that these two vaccines do have some ultra-cold chain requirements, which makes programmatic suitability a little bit more challenging. And it could also, the access to these technologies, to take the technology beyond COVID, there may be constraints in that. So these are still under very early stages of discussion. The other approach is to go with a number of earlier stage technology, and we have received a number of applications from developers who now have their products either in preclinical or in phase 1 trials. This needs to go through the whole phase of clinical development, so it is less certain that all of them will be successful. It will take a little bit longer. However, the advantages could be that we may have thermostable mRNA products which emerge out of this R&D process, and also that these developers who are at early stages, majority of them are willing to provide access on a very free, voluntary, non-exclusive basis, and therefore there will be much more freedom to operate. Both these approaches will be pursued because there are advantages and disadvantages. For the work itself in South Africa, as I mentioned, there is a lot more work that needs to be done. We are still at an early stage. We will be speaking with the two private companies, Afrigen and BioVac, that both have distinct roles in this process, as well as a consortium of universities, the regulatory agency, SAFRA, the Ministry of Science and Technology in South Africa, in order to develop not just the hub itself, but also to establish a training program. Because again, the idea of the hub is not just to produce vaccines, but also to serve as a training site for teams from other countries, from different parts of the world, to come and learn this technology and then take it back to the countries. So it will probably take 9 or 12 months to set the hub up, to start the manufacturing, and also to develop a training program and open the training center for teams to come there. And we will keep updating you as this develops and matures. We want to reiterate that the South African hub is only the first step towards first step in the process to establishing an equitable, consistent, and sustainable network of hubs across the world, not just for mRNA, but other technologies. And this slide just illustrates the concept where you could have the Latin American region having multi-tech hub in one country, or multiple hubs for different technologies in different countries as a regional approach, and similarly for Asia and Africa itself. And therefore, before the end of this year, we should see not only the technology selection, but also, and as I said, in the next few weeks, we will see phase 1 results from several of the early mRNA candidates. And now that we know what a successful mRNA candidate looks like by looking at the neutralizing antibodies that are elicited, we may have some idea of how immunogenic the other vaccine candidates are going to be. We have 5 working groups, and without going into a lot of detail, it's just to say that this whole process is very complex. It is multidisciplinary. It requires not just the focus on the technology and the IP issues, but also on the plants, manufacturing plants itself, which are relatively simpler for the mRNA technology, but much more complex if you want to have viral culture. You need BSL-3 laboratories. There's also the whole ecosystem around vaccine manufacturing, which includes clinical development, R&D capacity, regulatory issues, and all of those will need to be addressed as part of the workforce training programs. Business model and financing is important because we cannot risk having a facility with a lot of investments, which after the COVID pandemic is over and there's no longer need for COVID vaccines, cannot be kept idly. So a much longer term view and approach needs to be taken, and a plan for sustainability, for procurement of those vaccines, and that's why a regional approach is important. And finally, a working group that's on looking at the governance of both the hub as well the recipient centers or spokes that would need to be set up. And all of this will be overseen by a technical advisory panel that would be constituted, which would have, again, multiple expertise and disciplines coming together to oversee this whole process. And we are working very closely with our COVAX partners, particularly Gavi and CEPI, but also UNICEF, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the European Commission, the African Union, as well as the private sector organizations. So I think that's my last slide. I will stop there and turn it back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Soumya. So, Member States, colleagues, Excellencies, thank you. It's now an opportunity to ask any questions or provide any comments on the three presentations that we have had. Firstly, on Gorn, Mr. Pat Jury, and also I do believe we have Professor Dale Fisher and Dr. Gail Carson online with us for any questions or comments, to Dr. Mary Angela Shamau and Dr. Soumya Slomanathan. So over to you, Mr. Judasai, moderator for today's session. Member States, please raise your hand on the platform as per usual process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I do not see any requests on the floor, but I'll give it a few seconds and then revert. Indeed, we have a few hands that has just gone up, and I should like to give the floor to France, to be followed by, Australia, to be followed by France. Australia, you have the floor, please.
Thanks very much, Jude, and thank you to yesterday's joint announcements of the Joint Task Force, WHO, WTO, IMF and the World Bank indicated it would begin to focus on tracking and coordination of vaccines, compiling data on dose requests, contracts and delivery. I was wondering if you could please elaborate on how the work of that task force, the Joint Task Force, would mesh with the existing work that COVAX does on tracking and coordination.
Thank you very much, Australia. I should now give the floor to France, to be followed by Zambia. France, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much. In fact, my colleague from Australia has just asked the question I wanted to ask, so I would just like to thank Gorn for the presentation and for all the work that they have done, as well as thanking the WHO, and thank you to Mary Angela Simone for the information on the criteria that you have established. Thank you to the WHO's partners, because actually this answers a lot of the questions that we had, and that shows that we have had really fruitful discussions. And thank you to Dr. Swaminathan for the presentation on the hub, because we fully support this. We show that there are countries that will benefit from technical assistance, but will they be able to benefit from this in the next few days or in the next few months? Thank you.
First, may I invite Zambia, to be followed by Iran. Zambia, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, the DG and Secretariat, for the very informative updates. We welcome the establishment of the mRNA technology hub in South Africa. And at last, we can see some light at the end of the tunnel. My question is probably a political one, as it relates to the issuance of the digital COVID certificate by the European Union. According to the official information obtained from the European Commission website, member states, the EU member states will issue vaccination certificates regardless of the COVID-19 vaccine type used. But the granting of a green pass applies only to vaccines that have received EU-wide marketing authorization. Thus, if we have the AstraZeneca vaccine that is produced in the EU is included, but this criteria excludes the Covishield vaccine, which is produced by the Serum Institute of India. And therefore, under such regulations, persons who received Covishield, despite being able to demonstrate proof of vaccination, would continue to be subject to public health restrictions, including limitations of movement and testing requirements with considerable administrative and financial implications. So, going by that, we would like to know what is WHO's position on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zambia. And I invite Iran, followed by Germany. Iran, you have the floor, please.
I thank WHO and other organizers for hosting this important and informative event. Your panelists talked about the interim phase in allocation of vaccines through a COVAX facility that would consider new variables and epidemiological context. And I guess the seriousness or severity of emergency situations surrounding or involving different countries or settings is one of the indicators. My question would be where and how you posit or you include the refugee component in allocation of vaccines. This is particularly of importance for hosting countries who are hosting huge numbers of refugees, mainly from LDC countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Iran. I will invite Germany. You have the floor, please.
Thanks a lot for the presentations and the information just received. With regards to the presentation on the mRNA hub, we very much welcome the update and are looking forward to further updates when the mRNA hub develops further. And have a specific question with regards to the due diligence process that's ongoing concerning further regional mRNA hubs. We would be interested in hearing when the process will be finalized, especially in view of the fact that the last mRNA hub due diligence process finished quite quickly, and we were wondering whether the other regional mRNA hubs will be announced shortly, or whether this is a longer-term process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see no further requests for the floor. Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Jude, and thank you very much to those member states for those comments. We're nearly at the end of our meeting time, so I would ask that Secretary of Comments you be brief in your responses. I'm actually first going to hand the floor to Dr. Swaminathan and then the floor to Dr. Mariangela Shamau. So, Sumya, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll be brief and I will address two questions. The first one on the coordination of the task force with the COVAX. And it was clear from the call that the DG had with the heads of the World Bank, the IMF and the WTO that the four organizations coming together in this task force was mainly to support and to ensure that the work of the ACT Accelerator, the COVAX, could be really strengthened, harmonized, and any issues addressed which are actually stopping or impeding the supply of vaccines, and as well as drugs, diagnostics, PPE, oxygen, etc. So it covers all of those essential items that countries need, and therefore there will be a very close coordination between the task force and the ACT Accelerator, so that it covers across all the different work streams of ACT. And the idea is to really bring issues to this group of 4 very powerful agencies that together, working together, can try to address some of the logistical and other financial resourcing challenges as well. And then I would like to address the last question from Germany about the due diligence. Yes, we speeded up the process for the first one because it was urgent to begin somewhere, and we, as I explained why we wanted to begin in Africa. There were only a few applications from Africa, so we focused on those, and the Technical Advisory Committee was able to score, and South Africa was clearly the one that was selected as the first, but as I mentioned, there will be other hubs. The process for selection of the other hubs may take a few more weeks because there is a lot of back and forth, and we are working through our regional offices actually in order to engage member states of the region to come up with a more comprehensive and consistent approach for the regions. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me start with Zandia's questions about the EU digital certificate. Let me say that at the moment what we understand that the resolution, the regulation that was approved by the European Parliament on refers to the authorization by the conditional market authorization by EMA, and recommends individual member states of the European Union to accept WHO's emergency use listing vaccines. Let me reiterate to member states that the WHO's process for the emergency use listing is a very stringent assessment that follows international regulations, recognized standards, and it works very closely with EMA in various of this assessment. Of course, the AstraZeneca vaccine that's produced in India, which is the Covishield, has no market authorization in EMA, but has been authorized, listed by WHO as equivalent of the AstraZeneca original vaccines. So at this stage, we are working with European authorities to find a suitable solution that, in the understanding that the European authorities are very much supportive of WHO emergency use listing procedures as well as the pre-qualification program. So we will come back to member states and we will update you on the proceedings as they happen. Thank you for this question. This is very much in our radar right now. On Iran's questions about the new variables and the issues on the humanitarian and the displaced populations and refugees, let me remind everyone that we do have, through the COVAX facility, a humanitarian buffer, which is being discussed with the IASC, and where we intend to do an allocation for the humanitarian buffer as soon as we have the supply stabilized. But there are a lot of progression in this sense. I don't know if Claudia wants to complement on this. Yeah. So Iran, we have not forgotten the humanitarian population. They remain a priority. They were discussed at the Gavi board, and they remain a priority for the allocation of vaccines for these groups.
Thank you very much, Mariangela. Thank you, Soumya. Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Michael Ryan. In the interest of time, the Director General has asked that I please convey his best wishes, and I would like to close this meeting recalling that we will have another information session starting in 25 minutes from now on the issue of prevention of sexual abuse and sexual harassment. So with that, Member States, delegates, distinguished excellencies, thank you very much for your active participation today.
briefly.